Welcome artists, arters, and art appreciators to Ardor of Lore. This is the 7th video in my 12 Days of Toys Throughout December series, where I create a new little model every other day. This is inspired by the 12 Days of Christmas, but is not explicitly Christmas themed, and is instead focused on the one thing everyone following me probably enjoys, which is toys. Today's toy is actually miniature furniture pieces from the Mott's Miniature Workshop Manual. It is an extremely detailed book, although it's not bound like a typical book, full of step-by-step instructions on how to make miniature furniture. This book was written by Barbara and Elizabeth Mott, who are part of a miniaturist family, aka people who make miniatures. Their mother, Allegra, loved miniatures, and her husband, Dewitt, and her started creating miniature furniture in the 1940s and 50s, I believe. Their miniatures are most famous for being displayed at Knott's Berry Farm from 1957 to 1998, when they were taken down and sold at auction. This book was first published in 1978, so while the miniatures were still on display. In Blender, I imported photos of the 3 pieces that I found the most interesting, but full disclosure, I only did 2 of these pieces in this video because I underestimated the time it would take me to make all of them. The third one, the daybed style one, was just far too complex, even though I thought it looked cool. I found this book in a thrift store a while back, and I have the first edition from 1978, and there is a second edition in 1995. I don't know how updated the information it is, but it does seem to be more common on the market on places like Amazon and eBay. I think it's also traditionally bound instead of the sort of plastic binding that my version has, so it will probably stand up better over time. To me, this is less about the 3D printing aspect and more about getting to examine how these miniatures were constructed, and it's a good chance for me to talk about this book, which I've wanted to talk about for a while on my channel. My cousin has bought these little miniature sets online where you assemble everything together, but all of the pieces come in little plastic bags, and you take, everything out of the bags, and then you assemble it according to really detailed instructions. The internet is full of these sort of miniatures, but this book is pretty different because it explains in detail how to take flat 1/4 inch or 1/16 inch wood planks and dowels and assemble them from scratch. I think it's an interesting, much earlier take on it, and I think it really elaborates on the artistry of this kind of work. I will say that perhaps 3D modeling these furniture pieces goes against some of the spirit of this book with its intricate descriptions on how to carve, saw, and glue wood. I would like to do a video where I actually make a set of pieces out of wood, but I don't have the time, money, and skill to attempt that right now. And I also don't know if I would want my pieces to be at the same size as in the book, which I think might be like 1/12. I'm not sure exactly what the scale is, but they're quite small, and I would probably have to scale them up and decide which dolls to use them with, because I have a variety of sizes of dolls. I don't exactly know when and how I'll be using them. Of course, 3D printing didn't exist at the time, or at least didn't exist in its current form in 1978. I guess I don't know that much about the history of 3D printing, but it definitely wouldn't have been in people's ability to create things from scratch the way that we do today. But I have to say that I do appreciate that, wood is a more sustainable thing to make objects out of, and, it's good to encourage people to be using things like wood and kind of keeping older crafts alive. You can make a lot of interesting things out of wood. I do think it's in the spirit of the book for me to share the references I am using. The artist who wrote this, Barbara, and her sister Elizabeth, have now passed, but they appear to be passionate about sharing their work and, informing and educating people. They also have several designs that are directly referenced from miniatures in their collection, and they cite the source when possible, or at least cite that it was not their original design and things like that. I think they're very respectful about sharing various designs. So I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing this video without also sharing more of the images like you see on screen. Obviously, I am not allowed to redistribute this book. There is a copyright holder who seems to be selling it online, I think on Amazon, and it might be a digital-only copy. Plus, I don't think I could scan all 200 plus pages of the book. But But I will put up a free PDF on my Ko-fi for everyone of the first 10 or so introductory pages where the authors have their like dedications, material list, and some of their instructions on carving. And then the 3 projects you see in the background here, and then a couple more thrown in. You can buy the book for more of the furniture if you're interested in learning about how to make these miniatures. I will also include the color pages in the PDF, which are meant to be cut out and pasted onto some pieces of furniture, especially because if you get this book secondhand, I imagine it might not have all of the color pages. I will say the color pages are not the best, I guess, like, quality. It might be that the color has bled over time, but certainly it seems that the color is sort of fuzzy in a lot of the pages. I would love to go through all of the color pages and, like, make all of the lines much neater, but I don't have time to do that. There are like 6 or 7 of them, and they have very intricate designs, like little Persian rugs and things like that you can cut out and put in a mini house. Frankly, you can find a lot of similar information as is in this book elsewhere. There are sites about miniatures, obviously. It's a hobby that's existed for a long time, and there are people who have already put lots of information online. However, I find this book charming in a way that I guess just looking at websites about miniatures doesn't really make me feel. It has very nice illustrations and very clear step-by-step instructions. As the authors say, their father originally made his miniatures without power tools, and all their miniatures could, in theory, be made like that. The layout of a single page explaining the tools of the trade is, like, more lovely and concise than any website. It also kind of feels easier to have a book like this than to wade through modern websites that have tons of ads selling you things you don't want. Warhammer miniature websites also pop up when you're looking at dollhouse miniatures, so that gets kind of confusing. I feel like the nice thing about a book is, especially a book made at this time, and, you know, it doesn't have an infinite amount of pages, is that the authors clearly were trying to be as compact and, like, put as much information as possible into a small space. And that's just not something you see on the internet a lot nowadays, because honestly, people stretch out the things that they're writing so that they can fit ad space, which, like, I completely understand. Like, people sometimes need to do that, but it can get frustrating finding information online because of things like that. It also has some extremely dated addresses of shops where you could buy some of their supplies, which I personally find fascinating. It doesn't have anything to do with the miniatures, really. Well, I mean, it does, because there are places where you could buy, like, wood or glue. But obviously most of those places are going to be out of business because it's been, like 40 plus years. In a thrift store I was in, I found this bound book that was full of copies of an old magazine called Old Home Journal, I think it was, or something like that. And it's basically a bunch of, like, magazines, and I think these particular copies were from the 70s and 80s, although I think some version of this still exists today. And it had, like, instructions for how you could fix your house, basically. It would be like DIY instructions on how to change out, like, wiring in very old houses, or pick molding, I don't know. Just complicated stuff that, like, I didn't really understand it, but I gave it to my dad because he used to be a carpenter and plumber and everything, and it had a lot of really interesting information, and it had a lot of these addresses of places where you could buy supplies for that topic. And I find stuff like that really interesting. I mean, I also have gifted my dad and his partner, like, a book that's just about advertisements from the very early 1900s. So I just think it's really interesting to see, like, a snapshot of that time with all of the places where you would go, because obviously before the internet, it was much, much harder to find the right place to order from or the right place to go. And then, like, if you lived very far from somewhere, you might not know, that there was, like, a shop with really good glue that's across the country, but you could actually order things, as long as, you learned where the address was, and you could get, like, a slip of paper to like order things by mail, because ordering things by mail has always been very common. It just took a little bit longer in the 1970s and 80s, and of course you needed to do more research to know where you had to order from. So I just think that's really interesting. It's certainly a world away from buying those like kits you find on Amazon where everything is like already cut out. Like, I'm not trying to like bash those kits or anything. I'm just like, it's such a different era, but it's fascinating that this kind of hobby still exists in some form. This particular book has a lot of different styles of miniatures and different types of furniture, like chairs and tables, the basic stuff, and then, dressers and little pieces that are like decoration. It has discussions of like how to bind your own little tiny books, and some unique stuff, like I think there's a wash basin, which is like back in the day when you would have like when you wouldn't have running plumbing and you would just have your like little basin of water to wash your hands in or whatnot. And so just a bunch of more complex stuff. I think there's a grandfather clock. I'm not particularly familiar with different furniture styles, so I apologize if I get anything wrong, but I did do some brief research. They have a lot of what they call Windsor style furniture, which is a style that is apparently from the 1700s and is basically used to describe like 90% of chairs that have multiple thin vertical cylindrical bars at the back, topped with a horizontal bar or a curved bar on top. But it encompasses a whole range of aesthetics. So when something is described as Windsor, it can like look really varied. They have other furniture labeled things like Victorian, colonial, Welsh, Swedish, French. I don't know anything about the styles of those various countries, but most of the style seems to be from between the 1700s and the 1800s. Like I said, there's a huge amount of variance due to how old these are, and, they've always been reinterpreted over time. I'm not familiar with that kind of stuff. The only style I sort of know is mid-century modern furniture because my dad's obsessed with it. And the only Swedish style in my house is IKEA. The little table I made is actually labeled Oak Jardiniere Stand? ? It's a French word. The label is on the wrong page. The image that you see in this video says Oak Parlor Stand, but that's a different thing. I thought the table just looked decently modern and kind of interesting, and I didn't know what jardiniere meant, but it is describing, in English at least, a small side table that you would like put a little plant on, I guess. So that's where you put your little planted pot. It's just a decorative table. The second piece is a Victorian wall-mounted grooming mirror, as labeled in the book. So it does have an open spot at the back where you would have to like put your mirror, or I guess pull like a reflective piece of tinfoil if you're making it for a very small house and you can't find the right size mirror. I just thought this would be interesting to sculpt because of all of like the intricate details, and it feels like this would be fairly difficult to carve from scratch, especially for a beginner, but in a 3D modeling program it's much easier. It also includes a drawer that pulls out, but there isn't a handle on the original one, so I did make my own little tiny handle and tried to make it match the mirror. I liked the idea of the walnutted daybed, which was the third piece I was considering, but it was just too much to fit in this video and really complicated, and I would have had to read over the instructions several times. I think this already was an hour and a half or so for doing these two pieces, so I would need much more time to do that daybed. I would love to try them in the future and make them out of wood, and also make like a whole set of furniture, instead of just doing the like random pieces that I think are interesting. Here are the two pieces of furniture, all complete. They don't really match that much, but I like both of them on their own. They have such interesting shapes. My bad on the stand, the hexagon. So the hexagon is a little bit long compared to the feet of the stand, and that's actually because I thought that it wanted me to make a perfect hexagon, and in fact, I think it wanted me to make more of an elongated hexagon to make the width and height of the hexagon completely even, Anyways, it looks a little bit wonky from below, but I don't think it's very noticeable if you just look at it on its own. And it took me a little longer to upload to my Ko-fi, but both of these should be able to be found in the free files section, and later I'll put them on Cults 3D. The table can be printed without any supports, and then the mirror stand, wall mirror, should be printed with some minor supports for that little piece on the bottom, and then the drawer might need some support as well. Again, the PDF scan for a bunch of stuff in this book will be uploaded on Ko-fi for free for everyone, not just supporters. I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry about this taking so long to upload. I had some life stuff that delayed me, and then it was unexpectedly time-consuming to find this book, because I managed to lose it between filming and then working on the video. So thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you liked it. And thank you to my Ko-fi supporters, Yasella, Retro Geek Crafts, and Luca. Bye bye.